Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome you to the latest episode of Finding Light with me, Brad Carr. Today I'm very excited to inform you that I have my first guest on the podcast, and this is something I've been looking forward to. I started this podcast with the intention of diving into the minds of some of our country's and world's leading photographers and creatives. And today I'd like to welcome friend and fellow nature photographer Eugene Theron. Eugene was born in South Africa and now lives here in Wales. He photographs a wide range of subjects and doesn't like to keep himself in a box, as we find out later in the podcast episode. So he has a wide range of images covering seascapes, woodland, landscape, mountains. And in this episode we talk about photography as art, and is it art? Is it separate from art? We also talk about overcoming adversity through photography. Eugene opens up about some of his mental health struggles in recent years and how nature and photography has helped him through these dark periods of his life. We also talk about inspiration and originality and whether we are actually original at all as photographers. So I'd like to invite you to sit and relax and enjoy this discussion in the Shropshire Hills with Eugene Theron. Just pour myself a tea. It's a shame you haven't got a cup. Have you got one?
No, it's fine. I'll survive. I think I've had enough coffee today.
Okay. This is a chai tea.
Yeah, it's far too healthy. Yeah, I like chai. So.
Try that.
It's nice. Can I taste?
Yeah.
It's buzzing.
Oh yeah.
I got some quite nice chai bought back from India a few years ago.
All right.
Yeah, you should try it.
Proper stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I just bought it at like a little shop.
Well, this is from Welshpool, so it's not quite as luxurious.
India. Welsh chai.
But it does the same job. Eugene,
Brad.
how you doing?
I'm alright, thank you.
Good.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming.
That's a pleasure.
We're just two blokes having a chat about
Yeah.
creativity.
Yeah. Sounds pretty good.
So I have a question to start us off today, and I want to take us back to May, back at my exhibition in Montgomery.
Oh yes.
When you kindly came along to show your support.
Yeah, that was fantastic.
We had a lovely lady who called in, probably a little bit limited in her knowledge of photography.
Yes.
And she made a comment about, I can't remember exact words, but she kind of commented about photography maybe not being classed in the same category as artists, quote unquote artists. Yeah. I believe we're artists, you believe we're artists.
I believe it, yeah.
What are your thoughts on the kind of the comment that she made?
It's an interesting comment she made, because it's something I've thought quite long and hard about over maybe this year, the last few years, and certainly as I've developed along the way.
Yeah.
I certainly think photography is art.
Yeah.
Very strongly art, in fact. It's just that, we make it with a different tool. Some people make art with a paintbrush, some people make it with a pencil, some people sculpt.
Tambourine.
With a tambourine. Some people make music. We make it with a camera. And it's quite technical art, because you need to know how to operate your camera, you need to know how to read light, you need to know how to do all sorts of things that just the same way an artist does, but you apply it differently when you go out into the field, and you apply it differently when you sit at your computer and fiddle with Lightroom and Photoshop and whatever other programs and software plugins you have.
That is the key as well. You have to be out there as well. An artist can create from a room, from their home, and I'm not knocking up artists, painters, or whatever other means she was referring to. They have their skills, they have their expertise. In the same way, we need to be out to create. So we have to get up and force ourselves to go out, perhaps when we don't even want to.
Yeah, we do. And don't get me wrong, getting out of bed at 4 o'clock in the morning is not always the most pleasant experience. But it's when we have to get up to make our art and the pieces that we present to the world. It's just going on a little bit further from that. I mean, you say that is part of it, but what you do at home on the computer is also a big part of it, and that's almost how you put your sort of your final signature, your final stamp on it, is creating an image.
Yeah.
You know, by adjusting your blacks and the whites, and you know, using the brushes and masking tools, and etc. etc.
Because I guess you almost capture it as one thing with the idea in mind of what you're going to turn it into with your processing.
Well, we capture in RAW, which I'm not going to go into the RAW versus JPEG versus film debate, but we capture in RAW, and effectively what RAW is capturing data.
Yeah.
You're capturing ones and zeros of light.
Yeah.
And then you're taking that into a piece of software which can interpret those ones and zeros and turn them into, you know, you can adjust the colors, you can refine the colors rather. We're not really into adjusting or replacing, but you can refine the colors. The raw files are very flat, so you add in contrast, and you're adding, you know, maybe a vignette or a gradient or something like that to enhance it and present it present it as the piece that you want.
And as you've seen it in your mind as well.
That's
the art itself, isn't it? Because we all see different pictures. We could come to this location and both see in a completely different way.
Oh, completely. I'm pretty sure we would.
Yeah.
I mean, you and I, as we both well know, see the world in very different ways. We have different thoughts and processes that go on inside our head.
Yeah.
We're not the same person at the end of the day. And because we're not the same person, we don't see things the same way. You know, I've never been here before, but you know, I've been looking at sort of, you know, the landscape behind me and the trees and the ferns and the grass and cow pats and
minor details.
All the minor details, and you know, just seeing what's going on and taking in where we are.
Yeah.
If I got my camera out straight away, I'll probably make a mess of it. But you know, sitting here for the last half an hour before we started recording, you know, we take it in, we see, but you walking here, you may have seen something very different on the way in. So anyway, I think we've slightly digressed from the question.
No, that's great. That's the point of having a conversation. You never know where it's going to go.
Going back to the sort of photography and art, I get the impression. Well, I don't get the impression. I know from listening to people and hearing people talk that the way photography is perceived as art, or not perceived as art, especially in the UK, it is, I wouldn't say it's a problem for us as artists, as photographic artists, but there's definitely not the same appreciation for photography as art as there is in some other countries, say as in the US or even where I grew up in South Africa. People there take photography and they see it as art, and they see a creative piece which they can put on their wall and they can display as a piece, as a statement piece.
Yeah.
Whereas here, I think photography is seen as a sort of almost as a sort of a cheap and nasty art, which you can
because everybody's a photographer nowadays, right? Do you hear that very often?
I do hear that.
Yeah,
I do hear that quite a lot, but I'm not entirely sure where this idea stems from. But I think there is because it's taken with a camera. And everyone knows. A lot of people know how to use a camera. Anyone can take that.
Yeah.
The amount of times someone's walked past me and go, "Oh, I can take that with my iPhone," or "I can take that with my phone." It's like, yeah, fine, you could, but maybe you could, maybe you couldn't.
Yeah.
But I see what we do is we invest a lot of time, money, effort, emotion, etc., into creating that photograph, and it's very different from standing on the side of a cliff with your iPhone maybe once and just taking a little snapshot in time. Maybe you get lucky one day and you get a really amazing photo. I'm not judging it. But because of that, this is one of the reasons. Because of that, I don't think people here see photographs as art. Yeah, you can buy photographic art quite cheaply in some of the sort of more budget supermarkets and shops in the UK. And while that certainly has its place, I don't think it helps the photographic community.
No.
to sell their photos as art in the UK, and to get a reasonable return on the art they're producing.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, and I do think that there's a lot of photography out there being sold for a very cheap price. And
the same, and the opposite end, there's a lot being sold
and
for extortionate price.
Extortionate price. Unfortunately, it being sold at the cheap price, I do think it drives the general price of photography down.
Yeah.
And the general appreciation for photography down.
Yeah.
Because people see that as I saw a photo just like that in XYZ supermarket for £25, and you're selling it for £250. Why is that? And then you've got to go through the whole process of justifying the printing.
You don't have to.
I do sometimes.
You could tell them just to go and buy the other piece rather than
there is that
wasting your time if you want.
There is that too. But I think the more we make other people aware of how much how much the printing costs are, how much paper costs. Every time you jump in your car to go somewhere, it costs you, I don't know, say 10 quid in fuel. Every time,
And the fact that this piece of work could live on their walls for a lifetime.
That's true as well.
I mean, a few £100 for something, or even a few £1,000 for something that's going to last somebody their entire life.
But by the same token, some of those same people may end up paying a lot of money for a painting.
Sure.
So they pay £5,000 for a painting that they really like. Why is that different to paying £5,000 for a photo that you really like? It still had the artistic the artistic mind applied to it, the creative
that
process.
Takes a lot of time to develop, right?
A lot of time to develop, a lot of skills to learn. If we look at our photos, you and I look at our photos from when we first started taking them to now, and you think, oh God, what's that?
How's that happened? Yeah, how have I started taking pictures of tree trunks instead of grand sunsets?
I've got some quite fruity colours that you might like to see one day.
All right, I'm sure.
They were pretty radiant.
Yeah, I'd love to. Maybe we could trade, because I've got a bioluminescent tree that I photographed back in the day that I'm sure you'd love.
It's purples and magentas that you never knew were possible.
You've got to go through those phases to learn, right?
Anyway.
Yeah, so going back, what do you think needs to happen for the kind of photographic artist to catch up with the artist? I mean, I can give you an example, and I this podcast was kind of fueled by that comment. So I wonder whether more coverage of people could be something that you'd like to see, or maybe think needs to be seen in the world, more so than... I feel like photographers have a knack for hiding behind their images.
Yeah, I think ideas like your podcast is great for getting people out into the open, and making the general public aware that these people. There are people who make their living out of this. There are people who there are people who make their living out of it. There's people invest a lot of time and effort into creating the pieces that you find beautiful and see on Instagram. I honestly, or on social media for that matter, I honestly think that we as photographers need to get our images out further than social media.
Yeah.
And I know that's not always possible for all of us. I know it's an expensive undertaking. There's renting a gallery space or whatever. But I do think we need to get ourselves out there a lot more.
Get it into the real world.
Get it into the real world, so people see it on the wall and they go, "Wow, that's cool."
Yeah.
I really connect with that image. Whether it's a grand landscape, or an intimate scene, or an artistic impression, multiple exposure, or an ICM image, or whatever. Yeah. Someone might connect with that. And see it and maybe think to himself, that look, I appreciate that. That'll look good on my wall at home.
Yeah. I think there's something special about that shared space as well. Whereas if you're just looking at it on a screen and you're just on your own in your house, it's not the same as walking into a room where the photographer's gone to the trouble of setting up a space, putting some captions and some titles and some extra kind of things for people to take away, and having a group of 5, 6, 7 people in that same room gives them something to take away with them and experience. I don't think that can be substituted for Instagram or Facebook, right?
No, I completely agree. We just look at your little exhibition you had in earlier this year. I mean, how great was it to have, so many people you didn't know in a room talking about your photos and seeing them in a way that you don't really see just looking at a backlit screen.
Sure. You
see them in a frame on a wall, and some nice lighting, and you've got your bits on the table, and someone says to you, "Oh, I want to buy that, Brad," and so you go, "Okay, fantastic." I'll get it shipped off to you. It's a completely different experience.
Completely different.
I do think social media in a way has forced us as photographers to become a bit insular.
Yeah.
I think that's what you were alluding to earlier.
Yeah.
And we just sit there and we look at other people's images, or our own images for that matter.
Yeah.
And we don't really appreciate the sort of the tangibility of that piece of art. You don't appreciate seeing that on a wall.
Yeah, it's not real, is it?
It's a completely different way of experiencing the photo, and a completely different way of viewing, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I'm completely in agreement with you, because I feel like we're going too far down the whole of living in the AI world now.
Oh, that's another one.
And that's a huge topic to go on to, probably on another day. But I mean, we're already there. If you look at this, the way we spend time on these screens, it's not a real world, is it?
Well, no, it's not. I saw a silly little reel on Facebook or Instagram the other day, and it's I don't know where it came from or why it was even suggested to me for that matter, but it said, "Grandad, show me a picture of what you used to look like in 2023." And there was this picture of Grandad, and he had sort of little dog ears and little dog snout on it, and he's like, where are we going with this?
And what did it show a picture of what he looked like in the future?
No, it was just a joke sort of thing, but I was like, that's pretty apt.
Could be another, interesting one, couldn't it? I think the beauty of the real environment as well is that we have just talked for 15 or 20 minutes based on what somebody in that situation, in that environment, said.
Yes, no,
in the lady who made the comment.
Yes, completely.
And that that wouldn't have happened on. I mean, maybe you get a comment from somebody on social media, but it's not quite ever as in depth as what we got into on that day, is it?
No, not at all. I mean, she walked in there and gave you so much. We had a chat and a conversation, and there was feedback.
Yeah.
I didn't necessarily get the impression she appreciated every photo on the wall.
No, absolutely not. No, she made clear that she didn't in some instances, but I appreciate it.
I was trying to mince around that, but she...
no, I love that, though. I love the honesty.
But that's good, because, your photography or my photography is not for everybody.
Do you know the only person who likes every single one of my photos, can you take a guess?
It's your mum.
Is my mum. So if everybody else did, I'd be worried. I'd have no
I think
feedback.
my mum likes all of mine too. She's actually got one on her wall at home.
All right. Which one?
It's one of a church.
You have to show me.
Black and white image I took of a church. This was probably going back 5 or 6 years ago now. She kept, every time I spoke to her on the phone, she's like, "I really like that picture."
So back towards the beginning of your journey then. That was 5, 6 years ago.
Yeah, that's about right. So
we'll go on to that.
Wow,
we'll go on to that later.
The journey, but that was it.
Yeah. Well, this seems like a great route in, right? So, because you picked up a camera when you were a teenager first, right?
Yeah, I pretty much had a camera in my hand all my life since I was reasonably young.
Yeah.
My father was into photography. Mum used to moan that he liked taking pictures of things and not people.
Right.
So, and I was like, yeah, people are great.
Is that because your mum wanted her picture taken?
Yeah, now I take picture of things. So yeah, it's come full circle. So Dad was always quite into photography. My granddad was, my mum's dad was into.
So photography's in the blood, well and truly.
I've always done it.
Yeah.
I've always been inspired by it.
Yeah. But you only really started to take it seriously 6 years ago, right?
Yeah, about 6 years ago. Why did I...
Yeah, that was going to be one of my questions. Yeah, why the full circle? Why did you gravitate back to photography?
I've never left it.
Yeah.
I've never left it as such, but I did decide to take it more seriously.
Okay, yeah.
I've always wanted to take it more seriously, and I was working for the last 10 years or 9 years up until last year. I was working in the energy industry.
Yeah.
For better or worse.
Yeah.
And it's quite an intense industry, I guess, and I've always done a lot of climbing and hiking and stuff like that, and I guess I don't really know. I never made a conscious thought. You listen to some people talking in interviews like we're doing now, and they say, I wanted to go out and I wanted to create pictures because I wanted the separation from my hectic day-to-day life. And I never really felt like that. I've always done photography because I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I've never always been particularly good at it. I made a conscious decision to improve it.
Yeah.
6 years ago. Funnily enough, I was always reasonably good at taking portraits, but then my landscape photography was terrible.
Right.
Terrible.
Yeah.
And I wanted to improve it. So I did. So I went out to improve it.
Yeah.
It was sort of coupled with a bit of a climbing injury and
not
being able to climb and do the things I wanted to.
Yeah.
And then it just sort of snowballed from there. But it was a completely sort of subconscious decision that I just did. I had a reasonably decent camera at the time, which I used to take climbing photos and photos of friends, and I'd done a few mountain bike events and stuff like that. And I just thought, well, let's learn how to do landscape photography.
Yeah,
so
I think that's the beauty of something like photography, because it can just grab hold of you on, like you said, on a subconscious level, and I mean that doesn't need explanation sometimes, does it? It's just you following that curiosity that's inside of you. I believe, anyway. That's certainly what it was for me, anyway. It was, I guess, me getting back in touch with that child again that wanted to just play and explore and just click away. So I wonder.
I think that's there. I've always been a child.
Yeah.
I've never grown up.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
I've got older, but I don't think I've ever
I'm getting
grown
younger.
Up. Yeah. Yeah. I've never grown up. I'm very curious about nature and things and places. Probably places are the thing I'm most curious about. Sort of mountains and countries and deserts and all that sort of thing. I think by doing landscape photography, it's really helped me to hone that curiosity and see things in different ways. I've always been quite an observant person, but I think that it's helped me become more observant.
Sure.
A friend passed a comment a few years after I started taking it more seriously, maybe about 3 or 4 years ago. He said to me, Eugene, you just notice everything, and like all the details. Like, we'll be driving along, I'll go, oh, look at that.
Yeah.
Maybe that's sort of part of a distraction. Yeah. So going back to the curiosity, I think that I don't like the word journey, but I think as you sort of develop your skills in photography and progress, you become observant to different things as well. So for argument's sake, this is not necessarily what happened to me, but you start with shooting grand landscapes, for argument's sake, and then you may develop that to shoot more intimate landscapes. And I think that's quite a classic path for a landscape photographer, or a nature photographer for that matter.
Whatever we want to label ourselves.
Whatever you want to label yourselves as.
Yeah.
Which, that's another story altogether.
Yeah.
But I think that, for me, I've always run around like shooting little details of things, and then when I got into landscape photography a bit more, I thought to myself, maybe I should shoot the grand landscape.
Yeah.
Because I love wide open spaces. I love the scene behind me. That's a really nice example. But I love space. I love light. So I thought I'd incorporate that in. And, you know, as I've developed, I now take a few more intimate scenes.
Yeah.
I don't think I'd want to only be that kind of photographer, because to me that you miss out on such a lot.
Well, I have a question about that actually. So
Yeah, go on.
Having followed you for maybe 3 years, 2.5, 3 years or so, I've noticed you kind of refuse to box yourself as woodland photographer or seascape photographer or landscape photography. You love to spread yourself across all different genres. Is that something you've done on purpose because you maybe don't like to be boxed and categorized and labeled, or is it just simply because you love photographing?
And my mother's going to love listening to this answer. No, I hate being in a box. I hate being something that is defined.
Yeah.
It is not a conscious decision with landscape with the photography I put out and what you see. But I've never liked being in a box. That is, I think as a society we are all too easily boxed and categorized and based on colours or religions or whatever, or intimate landscape.
It goes down to everything,
or
doesn't
seascape
it?
photographer.
Yeah,
or
we love to belong.
And don't get me wrong, I'm not for 1 minute belittling anybody who does.
Yeah. But you have your opinion.
Niche photography. In fact, I think there is a place for it.
But not in your world.
Not for me. I like to do everything. I like to know how to do all sorts of things. I like to learn how to do different kinds of things. I like to go to different places. And one thing that I really find with not putting myself in that niche is that it enables me to tell better stories of the landscape.
Okay.
So you probably don't know this because I've not told anyone.
Right.
But I've put a project together.
Okay.
Based on, it's out on the coast in Anglesey.
Yeah.
I've got a quite heavy interest in geology and the natural world.
Yeah.
I've been going out to Anglesey for the last few years, and it's telling a story of the geology and the way the waves and the landscape interact with each other. But it's through all different types of focal lengths. So I've looked at the structure of the rocks. I've looked at the way the waves interact with the geology. I've little vignettes of things. So little vignettes of the rocks and the coast and the waves. And when you bring them all together, you're telling a much bigger story.
Sure.
And you can weave all sorts of different narratives into it as well. And on top of that, I've even tried to weave some of the Welsh mythology.
Oh right, okay, that sounds awesome.
Revolving around dragons and that side into it as well. So it's telling a much more complete story than it would be if I was just shooting a wave or just shooting tree trunks or whatever. So I think it opens your mind up a bit more, or it opens my mind up a bit more to different possibilities. My mind tends to be in 1,000 different places at once, and I think if I focused on one aspect of landscape photography, I would get bored very easily.
Yeah.
I know I'll get bored very easily.
And is that something you teach as well?
It's something I teach, in some of the workshops I've given.
Yeah.
I try to encourage people not to box themselves into it, especially when they're learning, I think, as well. Sure. The more possibilities that you have to shoot in different environments and different landscapes, with showing to test different aspects of your technical skills, is going to make you a better photographer in the long run. Yeah. I mean, you can use, for argument's sake, you can go out to the coast and you can practice long exposures. And you can get some lovely waves and lovely streaking water and stuff like that. But then by the same token, you can come to a woodland and you can use that to your advantage. You could take an image of a tree and the trunk may be perfectly still, but you'll get all these beautiful moving leaves and soft, that soft ethereal look to your image. But where have you learned that skill? I learned it at the beach. because
it's all interchangeable. Sure,
it's interchangeable.
And every genre, portrait, street,
exactly.
Anything you do, urban stuff, it can all link in.
Like street photography is great for teaching you things about structure, lighting, angles, things like that.
And human emotion, which can come back to
emotion, and you can bring that back into your photography as well.
As long as we're constantly learning and expanding, I think it all comes back. I mean, we have our core, which is clearly nature, landscape photography, but then from that, why not go and explore and experiment and learn something and bring it back with you?
100%.
It's all a process of growth and expansion, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I take, and I think it helps you appreciate other kinds of photography as well.
Absolutely,
and the skill and the process that goes into that. Whether it's an underwater photographer or photography or landscape or wildlife or street or portraits or war documentary, for that argument's sake. I mean, you can really appreciate the skill that goes into.
Absolutely, and I can't wait to get lots of different kind of genre of photographers on here to talk about their
it'd be fascinating.
Not just nature, not just landscape, and not just photographers, creatives in general. I find the creative mind fascinating, to be honest. To
very much
see where events have led us, like events in our own lives have led us here, and it's fascinating to break that down and think about things that have happened. And that's a question I had for you. Actually, it's taken me very nicely onto this path now. So thinking back to your own journey, I mean, you grew up in South Africa, right? How long did you spend in South Africa?
I was there for 22 years.
22 years.
Almost as long as I've been here now.
Right, okay. And thinking back then, I know it's a relatively long time ago now, right? Are there any events back in South Africa in your early life that you think have perhaps shaped yourself and shaped your vision, how you see the world now?
Yes, I think there have been. I've always, my parents were both very much, I say were, they still are very much in, they are still alive, and my mother will call it, so I can edit that bit out. What was I going to say? Tangent again.
Your parents?
My parents are both quite into sort of doing things surrounding nature. When I was younger, hiking, we did a lot of hiking, although I might have resented some of the hikes that I did when I was long distance hikes with Dad when I was younger. But we used to go on holiday to sort of national parks and see animals and go on to self-drive safaris. And from a very young age, I have been immersed in nature. Yeah. And I think that gives you a solid appreciation of it when you go to other countries and see what the nature is like in other countries. Yeah. I mean, the landscape in South Africa is very pristine. It's very untouched in a lot of places. Right. It's quite wild. Yeah. Not something you necessarily get in the UK, or especially not Wales. No. Wales and England, but maybe to a certain extent you do get up in Scotland, which is somewhere I love going. And I think the reason I love going to Scotland is because it sort of reminds me a lot of the sort of the wide open spaces, and it just feels a little bit more wild than the rest of the country does. I was speaking to a friend of mine the other day about photographing the mountains in Snowdonia, and he said to me, he's finding it hard to connect with the mountain landscape here. Yeah. And later on he said he thinks it's because there's so much man-made influence. And if you look at Snowdonia, there's a lot of quarrying history, industrial history, which is fascinating in itself. But when you sort of, I guess when you yearn for sort of these wild places, these great open landscapes, and you're seeing sort of a quarry or old mine workings, in it, then I can understand why it's hard to connect with. I think it took me a little while to connect with Snowdonia, because I've been thinking about this, what he said, for the last week or so, and I think I found it quite hard to connect with it at first, and I do go out of my way to find compositions which don't have man-made influence in them.
You and me both,
And quite often, there's a photo I took earlier on this year in spring of two trees in a woodland, and there's a very small bit of wall in it.
Yeah.
And I can't get past that small bit of wall.
Once you've seen it, you can't unsee it.
It's fine, and it's there, and I accept that it's there. But when I didn't notice it properly at the time. I thought it was something else.
Yeah.
But now, in the image, it's very clear.
And it completely ruins it for the story we're trying to tell, doesn't it?
Exactly, and it's sort of, and I think for that matter, I think you really have to look a bit further in the landscape.
Yeah.
Here in England and Wales, especially to find compositions.
Maybe that's why we gravitate towards the intimate landscapes. I know for me, it certainly has been a way to maybe eliminate some of the signs of roads and pathways and walls and fences by just adopting a long lens and zooming in. Yeah,
that's true as well. I think there's a little bit of putting your own stamp on an area or a style for that matter.
Yeah, sure.
I do think that all sorts of landscapes have a place, though. I don't think you can discount human emotion or a photographer's personal emotion from a wider angle landscape. Because I don't know what was going through someone else's head when they took that photo. And I do hear a lot of narrative these days where it says, yes, we need to look more at the intimate landscape, and that's how you develop as a photographer, etc., etc. Intimate landscapes are more personal. Wider landscapes are not as personal, but...
You're a rebel, so you can't like those kind of comments, no?
I understand where they're coming from.
Yeah.
But I also think that even in the wider landscape, there is a personal element. Sorry, I think that when taking an image of a wider landscape, there is a personal element of that, a personal element in those photographs, because if I'm standing on the edge of a desert, looking in with some mountains and sand dunes and stuff like that, that is incredibly personal to me.
Yeah.
Because I love being in places like that. I love being in those situations. And I find it very difficult when I've been told by once on Twitter, when it was Twitter, before it became X, that how could this landscape be personal to me? It's just the same someone else would see when they walked there. And it wasn't even a well-known scene. It was something. It was just a wider scene.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of me in the wider landscape, and there's a lot of me in the intimate landscape. And I think they both have a place, and I don't think we should discount that. And I do think that when we are talking about the narratives of intimate landscape, potentially being a more elevated form of photography, maybe that's not the right word or the right phrase to put it that way, but there is definitely an argument that says, as you develop as a photographer, you do see more of the intimate scenes. I don't think we should discount photographers who shoot the wider landscape or shoot any kind of landscape. I think as long as it is well thought out and well put across. And
I just love to know the reasons why a lot of the time. If somebody can present their reasons why they're shooting certain scenes and it can communicate a little bit more about them as people, that's what I love to hear, personally.
Yeah, and that's why something like this is good, where I can sit to you and I can sit to you. Sit in front of you and say to you, when I step into a wider landscape, that really, it fills me with a lot of pleasure, a lot of joy, a lot of freedom.
And I get that from looking at a lot of your wider photos, especially mountaintop photos. I sense the emotion in a lot of those images.
Yeah, thank you.
Like I can step into those scenes.
Yeah, and that's fantastic, and that is, I guess, something I try and put across in those images. I try and sort of weave a bit more of a narrative into some of them.
I remember an early comment you made to me at the beginning, I think it was the first time we met actually, and you told me that somebody had made a comment about a lack of emotion in your photographs, and you seemed very upset by that, because clearly there's a lot that goes into images.
Yes, I think I remember this. I'm just trying to remember the image it was, because I sort of discarded that from my memory.
Did you?
In some ways.
Yeah.
It was also on our
Twitter.
favourite Twitter. Yes, there was a lack of emotion, and it's actually one of the reasons I stopped using Twitter. And I actually went through and deleted some posts.
Right.
Where there was negativity.
Yeah, sure.
So I've had to put that. I guess I was offended in a way, but I'm also not offended in a way, because I know what that person was saying was not really valid.
No.
Not in my mind, at least.
No.
And
it could point to something in themselves that they can't sense
quite possibly
emotion.
I do think there's emotion in my images.
Yeah.
Is that always perfectly portrayed? Maybe not. We're not perfect as photographers or artists, or we make mistakes.
What does it even mean? Yeah.
I make mistakes.
That's part of the growth process, right?
Yes.
And I had a question leading on to that. It was about mistakes, actually. Are there any mistakes along your creative journey? I know you said you don't like the word journey. I like the word journey. So your creative journey so far, that maybe you'd look back on and think that was a significant mistake or a significant turning point.
Now you got me thinking. Yeah, I think I've probably made a lot of mistakes along the way. I've made. You can look at it from a lot of different perspectives, I think, in making mistakes. I've made mistakes in editing. My editing at the beginning was atrocious. Luminescent magentas and etc. I've made mistakes by not investing in quality equipment.
Yeah.
I think that's actually something that's overlooked. Yes, you can make images with just about any camera and stuff like that, but if you are looking to take it more seriously, I think you can, investing in quality equipment is...
Yeah.
I've never really been one to... I don't know if this is a mistake or it's not a mistake, or it's something sensible for that matter.
Yeah.
But I've never gone and looked at someone else's photograph and thought to myself, I want to make my picture just like that. And I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword. I think you can learn from other people.
Agreed.
You can learn from other people's compositions. You can learn from other people's, way they process their images, way they take it. I've always tried to do things my way, for a lack of a better way of putting it. I think it's held me back a little bit in developing my skills, and maybe I've been a little bit slower at developing than other people. I'm not averse to learning from other people. In fact, I think it's a very good way of learning, a very good way of developing yourself is to learn from other people. But I also think that learning and making your own mistakes along the way, you understand why you've made a mistake. You understand why did I make a technical error in that photo? Why does it look like muddy poo, for lack of a better way of putting it? Why does that image look terrible? And by sort of studying it yourself, and actually, it's incredibly frustrating sometimes. I sat for hours in front of the Lightroom going, why doesn't that work? Why doesn't it work? And sometimes I've gone to YouTube, and sometimes I've asked friends or whatever how to do it. But I think that as a younger, as a person who's earlier on in their photographic career, there's a lot to be learned from others, and whether that is buying a tutorial or going on a workshop or etc. They're very good ways to learn, and it would maybe have helped me to learn faster. And these days, I'm a lot more open in the ways I learn.
Yeah.
Rather than sort of a lot of trial and error by myself.
Yeah.
And I think there's merit in both sides. So.
Because I'm going to just add a little bit on that, because I don't think anything that we create is original. I think everything we are has come from outside of us, whether we know it or not.
Right, influences.
Everything we've seen, everything we've spoken about, it all becomes part of who we are. So if I were to say that my photos are completely me, then I take photographs like me. Yes, in some ways, but that is also made up of a lifetime of, like you said, observation. I've been an observant person ever since I was born. Sat, observing the world go by, people, conversations, trees, everything. So would it be my choice to say that it's mine?
I
not that there's a right or wrong.
I don't think there's a right or wrong here. I mean, personally, I think you take in all the influences around you, subconsciously or consciously, and apply them to the person you are, or your day-to-day life, or the pictures you create, or whatever. It doesn't necessarily have to be a measurable. It doesn't have to be a measurable thing, does it?
Yeah.
You can you can have influences without knowing something.
Yeah.
But ultimately, the images that I feel the images that you create are ultimately you. Unless it is you're saying, thinking to yourself, okay, I'm going to go and copy a Mark Adamus composition and put all the touches on it, and create an image in the way he does. And I'm just using him as an example, but it's someone we all know. But when you go into the landscape and you ultimately press the shutter and you take the image and you get back to your computer and you process it and you print it and present it, or you put it on Instagram and you present it, that is ultimately you at the end of the day. I can see your argument why you are influenced by other things, but I don't think you. I wouldn't
say I steal. I wouldn't.
No, but I don't think you. I don't. There's so many influences in the world today.
Oh God, every day. Yeah.
Every day, that you can't help but notice these influences, and maybe subconsciously my images have been influenced by an image I've seen on social media or on someone's website. It's not a conscious decision.
No.
And that's why I feel that my images that I make are me.
Yeah.
I don't feel like anybody else's. I don't feel anybody else necessarily see them in the same way. Maybe to a certain extent style. Well, not style, but like the way we arrange things.
Yeah.
But I always look for angles and my own.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a good example of influence, isn't it? Angles and structure and putting them into an image. But maybe it's the music you listen to, or the films you watch.
I'm glad you just brought that up, because I have one of my favourite quotes on creativity is by Ansel Adams.
Right.
You don't make a photograph just with a camera. You bring to the act of photography all the pictures you have seen, the books you have read, the music you have heard, the people you have loved. So, with this in mind, where have you gained inspiration to create, and what are the most significant life experiences and memories that have led you to make photographs for this world?
Wow.
Thinking time is allowed.
Pause to think.
Yeah.
Wow.
And you can be as open, as closed, as vulnerable as you like.
I take a lot of inspiration from places I go. In space, being outdoors, being in nature, like we are today. That really, just the experience of being outside has influenced my photography a lot. I think that is probably the primary influence on it.
What is it about being outside?
I don't know. I've never been able to put my finger on it. I don't like being cooped up.
Sure.
I don't like being in a box, as we discussed earlier. So I get uncomfortable. I don't like being in a box, and there's not many boxes outside. You're not tarred with a brush for, being one thing or another. So I think, and I take inspiration from mountain ranges and deserts and places.
So the formation of these things.
Yeah, the formation of them, just being there. A lot of time. I think there's a lot of geology and time and sort of impermanence of time that has been woven into my photography, whether it's noticed by people or not. Because things change so often. Even the great mountain ranges change.
Sure.
But it's just, for me, it's more just the feeling of being out there and being in the wide open landscape and being in places I've never been to before and I know nothing about. That really inspires
Quite
me.
humbling.
I would say music has inspired me a lot.
Yeah.
Sometimes when I see a scene, I can sort of hear music floating through my head.
What kind of music?
Oh, anything.
Does it vary,
depending
on where you are?
From, Interstellar soundtrack to some cheesy 80s tune.
Right.
It doesn't really matter. It's sort of...
I've never been inspired by George Michael.
Ah, well,
Interstellar theme tune, definitely.
Freedom. Yeah. So, I'm inspired by place and structure. The very earliest photo I remember seeing was in a National Geographic magazine. Someone climbing in Patagonia, and they were climbing one of the towers in Cerro Torre, and I just remember being completely and utterly captivated by the shape and the weather and the colours and stuff. And I've always tried to find this magazine again. It was a National Geographic. My parents must have had when I was a child, but that was the earliest image I remember.
Was it a case of you feeling like you were in that?
You're feeling in it.
Photograph.
You're feeling there.
So that's perhaps something that you like to enable other people to feel.
I guess
when
so.
you take photographs,
I
maybe.
guess so. I guess I do subconsciously. It's not a conscious decision again.
I don't think
a
much
lot
of
of
what we
I think
do
a lot
is.
of my photography happens, or my image making happens subconsciously.
I think a lot of photographers do act subconsciously. It's,
sometimes it's quite difficult to sort of put a reason on why you do something.
Yeah, I'm pretty obsessed with finding reasons.
Yeah, I think the reason comes after sometimes, because like quite a lot of time I'll be in the landscape and I'll be taking an image, for argument's sake, looking at a scene, and I sort of set the tripod up and frame it up and press the shutter button.
Yeah.
But the emotion and the connection comes later.
When you're analysing
when you're sitting
it and you're reliving it.
Sitting there, having a drink.
Yeah.
Looking on your computer, editing it up. You think, and then that's where the emotion comes in.
I feel like that's when you're reflecting on how ephemeral that moment was, and maybe in the moment you're so caught up with the technicals of the camera and composition that you're perhaps not so aware that this moment is this, finite kind of blip in whatever this thing is. But when you sit and analyse it afterwards, you're like, I'm never going to see that. Never going to see that again. But I've got the photograph. Yeah.
And I think. I think being out in the landscape and experiencing that sort of thing as well, it gives you a much. Never mind.
No, go on. It gives you a much.
What
are you trying to articulate? Because I feel like that could have gone somewhere.
I think it gives you a much better appreciation of the landscape and the world that we live in,
and life,
than than by not doing it.
I agree, and that's the beauty.
And I encourage more people to do it and get out and see these things and experience, these ephemeral moments of light. I mean, I've just been watching this the sun moving behind this tree in front of us, and it's fascinating. I mean, and it's not something I'll ever be able to capture with a camera, but you can sit here and you can look at it and you can appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
get some nice lighting.
Beautiful. It's presence, isn't it? I feel like it's complete presence when you're immersed in nature. And isn't that what we're all seeking? Yeah. Whether as creatives or sports players or anything, is the kind of escaping the thinking mind and being in the moment, being in the now.
There was something else I wanted to touch on with inspiration, and that's inspiration from other photographers. It's I am inspired by other photographers, very much so. Maybe mostly from the places they visit, and also obviously the images they create there. But I don't feel that I add a lot of that influence consciously into my own photography. Whereas other people, they seem to understand every photographer out there. They seem to, be aware of everything they do and think. And I think you start losing yourself a little bit.
Yeah, agreed.
When you become
too fixated
on what everyone else is doing or what people have done before you.
Yeah.
You start. I don't know. Sometimes people say, "Oh, that's your image. Oh, that looks like a XYZ photographer's image."
Sure.
And maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But as long as you're honest with yourself, when you go out and you make that image, and if you are using someone else's ideas, credit where credit's due.
Yeah, I'm fully with you on this actually, because although I love to study photographers' quotes, like I've mentioned Ansel Adams before, I'm very interested in other people's takes on the creative process. I'm definitely not so obsessed with studying other people's work in the way that it can influence mine too greatly. Of course, I love to see other photographers' photographs.
Oh, sure.
And
it's half the joy of
look
it.
At them from a, sometimes you flick through or you go on their website and have a look. But I'd never sit and study intensely another photographer, because this is a journey for me to know myself. So why be so obsessed with others?
Yeah, I think this is a sort of bit of a sort of interpretation of society in general today, but we are sort of, as a society, very obsessed with what other people are doing, whether
pedestals and idolization,
exactly, celebrities,
football players, which I was guilty of when I was young. I love football players.
Don't get me wrong. I mean, I think there's some fantastic people out there. Who do fantastic things. There's some fantastic sportsmen, and but I think there does sort of become a bit of unnecessary idolization.
You got to draw a line. Yeah, and I no longer have posters of Michael Owen and Stephen Gerrard up on my
or George
bedroom
Michael.
or George Michael.
But yeah, I think we need to appreciate our own lives more. And,
sure. And know thyself.
know thyself, not necessarily a celebrity. And don't get me wrong. I think celebrities some of them are in a position where they're doing fantastic work, and they are certainly some of them people to look up to as well.
Yeah.
But I think we need to pay more attention to ourselves and less attention to others.
Yeah. So I had a question following on from the previous about the Ansel Adams quote, and so it is my belief that without adversity, creative work wouldn't be possible, or creative work of any significance anyway. I believe that everything's born through our struggle and pain if it's worthwhile, right? So the most memorable creations to my mind are rooted in struggle. Are there any adversities that you have faced through your life, and how has it shaped you and your work?
Deep. Yes, I see where you're coming from. I think there is a lot of sort of emotion and personal experience in art.
Yeah.
Photography we create, and you, for that matter. And I think that is a lot of that does stem from past experience.
Sure.
I'm not sure. For me, I don't think my photography is defined by that.
Sure.
I have had experiences in the past. I've had some mental health problems in more recent years.
Yeah.
Which I'm currently getting over it, or mostly over, as he says. And some other things that have happened sort of earlier on in life. I don't know how to say this. Yeah, some things that have happened earlier on in life. Coming out to my parents was obviously very difficult for me.
Yeah, sure.
And sort of stepping into that world, that sort of kept my brain very occupied.
What age was that?
I was 27.
Yeah.
So 28.
Yeah.
15, 16 years ago now.
Yeah.
So I'm 43 now.
Yeah.
Soon to be 44.
How was that taken back then?
Fine, absolutely fine. It was more of a conception. I built it up in my mind as people do.
Yeah.
When you don't know what the outcome is going to be, and you sort of built it up in your mind. I did grow up in a very prejudiced, well, not totally prejudiced society. My parents are not prejudiced like that in terms of gay people and things like that. But a lot of the kids I went to school with were. There's a lot of gay jokes throwing around. Teachers used to throw gay jokes around.
Oh, right,
etc.
okay. Yeah, sure.
So you sort of think to yourself,
yeah, it's no wonder you had that barrier built up in your mind.
Maybe I won't tell anybody for a while, but eventually it sort of sits in you.
Yeah.
And there were some very, very dark times associated with that.
Yeah.
And I'm very lucky that my mum and my dad were both very accepting of it. My brother and his family as well, and friends for that matter. I have, to this day, I've not had too many bad experiences. Touch wood.
Yeah.
But that has it influenced my photography? Not that directly. Not that is things directly, but maybe sort of negative thoughts, can be seen woven into things.
Yeah,
I think a lot of my images are quite dark.
I was going to just pick up on that. There's a few, especially some of the more significant ones that I've seen in your portfolio. They have that hint of dark and light with a hint of light.
It's sort of. I think I've tried I think we talked a little bit earlier about that impermanence of life or nature and. Nothing is permanent. Whether there's light and dark, or there's life and death, or
sure.
Whatever. And maybe I do try and weave someone into that. I've got a little project on the
I love that.
on the go called which is also news to other people because and it's looking at the impermanence of trees and woodland. It was inspired by a scene in my local woodland which I'd taken and then later found that a lot of the trees were going to be cut back down due to ash dieback.
All right.
And it's now sort of looking at sort of what these trees look like and this,
right.
And trees with damage.
Yeah.
And trees with, a broken limb or a
so maybe
part of, maybe some of that's maybe some of that sort of some of the brokenness from the past has sort of been woven into that.
Yeah.
Obviously, my sort of more recent struggles with mental health from other reasons. Maybe that is certainly woven into it. I remember very clearly looking at an image a few weeks ago and going, "It's quite dark." Not from a dark mental point of view, just from a dark colour. I just thought that looks quite miserable. And I'm not sure I wanted it to be miserable because I'm not generally a miserable person. So it's so I think some of that adversity is been weaved into it.
Sure. Was photography during that period of your life, maybe when you were building these issues up in your mind, the lack of the issues, speaking to your parents and verbalizing these things, was photography perhaps, was it a saving grace for you at those times? Even in your recent struggles with mental health, was photography your saving grace, your escape, your light in the darkness, if you like?
Yes and no. In the sort of more recent times, I've struggled to do anything.
Yeah.
So, and not getting out and doing stuff has been a bit of a problem.
Yeah.
In the past, and so having something to do in terms of taking the camera out, and making images, that certainly helped.
Yeah.
Sometimes when you get out in the landscape though, and you sitting there with your camera, you just don't feel like making an image.
You're thinking, what the hell have I come out here for?
It's pissing with rain.
Yeah, what am I doing?
It's blowing over. And then maybe you make a nice image. Or you see something that captivates you. You make that nice image, and you go home and you feel a lot better about yourself.
Yeah.
I certainly think without it, it would have been a lot worse.
Sure. Because it gave you purpose, right?
Yeah, it gives you purpose.
Every man
gives you
needs
something
some purpose.
to do,
and woman needs some purpose.
and now it's turned into a bit more of a career.
Yeah.
Which is.
And I love that.
Which is interesting. So I think.
Yeah, I love that you're finding ways to include personal expression into photos and give work a deeper meaning than just here's a photo of nature, but actually this is what nature means to me and this is what photography means to me, because I think photography can be used for a lot more than communicating time and place.
Yes.
It's brought catharsis to many of us in our life, and emotional expression and freedom and sense of lightening burdens. And
I think ultimately for me it's about being able to it's a way of putting myself out into the world. That sounds very sort of egotistical, but it's not the way it's meant to come across.
No, it doesn't sound egotistical at all.
It's like it's my way of putting myself out there.
Yeah.
And it's the way I feel most comfortable putting myself out there. Some people thrive by sort of, ascending to the top of a corporate career. Some people thrive by teaching kids, how to learn and become better human beings. You know, I thrive by taking images and putting them out to the world, and putting myself out to the world. And if they're appreciated by other people, that's great. I don't expect them all to be appreciated, or liked for that matter. But nor is my self-belief sort of completely
out of proportion, out of control.
Oh no, it's a self-belief. It's not mixed up in how people perceive the photography. It's great if people like
it. It's a bonus,
it,
right? Because you want your voice to be heard, yeah?
Yes, of course it's a bonus, but I think that's also part of what we do. I think that any artist, photographer or painter who puts art out into the world does expect someone to like it. They want people to buy their art or take their workshop or whatever. So getting that some kind, the positive feedback from it, I think is important to anybody. I think we'd be lying if we didn't get satisfaction from people appreciating what we did.
Sure.
Because I think we as the human race, we like to seek validation.
We're seeking approval, aren't we?
We're seeking approval
and validation. Perhaps what was missing in our younger years.
If we like it or not, maybe it's got to do with our younger years, maybe it's got to do with something else.
Yeah.
It's very hard to put a finger on.
Natural. I think we're all looking for the same things.
Yeah, we're all looking for something.
We want to be seen and heard.
Seen and heard, something to make our own.
And make a difference in the world in some way, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Hence why we're creating art. So from that, what difference are you trying to make with your art? What difference are you trying to... What are you trying to add to the world?
I think I'm trying to add an appreciation of the natural world. I'm trying to... I don't want people to see it the way I see it. I want people to see it the way they see it.
Yeah.
And I also want people to be able to protect the natural world.
Yeah.
And as cliched as this sounds, I feel that by making images of the landscape or wildlife for that matter, that people will get to people will learn to appreciate and protect the planet a lot more, protect nature a bit more, respect nature a bit more. But I think going further than that, I want people to see photography as art.
Yeah.
I want people to appreciate different kinds of art and what it brings to the world or to them or to other people who may want to create.
So maybe one final question.
Okay.
Two final questions.
Two final questions,
and we'll wrap it up, and we'll go search for some pictures up on the hills there. So, what have you learnt about yourself through the creative process? Are there any transferable skills that you've learnt and carry over into the rest of your life?
Wow. Are there any transferable skills? I think I've learnt quite a lot about myself in the last 6 years. I've certainly learned to become a bit more, for lack of, I hate this word, but I've certainly learned to become a bit more in touch with feelings and emotions. That's probably weaved into some of the mental health issues and and things like that. I've always been sort of quite open to that sort of thing in a way, but I think the photography and sort of meeting people like yourself and other sort of introspective people have really helped develop the way I see things and even the way I live my life in a way. Yeah. In some respects, I'm a lot more relaxed. I understand where I fit to the greater world, if you want to call it that. And what was the question again?
It was, what have you learned about yourself? What transferable skills?
Transferable skills.
So, I mean, that's a great answer.
I brought a lot of transferable skills into photography, which I worked in a corporate environment before. I think I brought a lot of transferable skills the other way. So, communication, presentations. Teaching.
I want to know what you've learned from photography there.
You want to know what I learned from photography and taking to the real world. I've always had a very good appreciation of nature, but I think I have a much greater appreciation of nature now. And I think it's something I'd like to show more of in my photography, and maybe do more for some of the problems that we have in the natural world. And I think through I was always very good at sort of physical communication, talking, etc. But photography has really taught me how to communicate visually as well. On top of the sort of the verbal communication.
One last question.
Okay.
Where would you be without this form of art and expression?
It's an interesting question because I've always sort of, before photography there was climbing, and the climbing's not entirely gone away. Before there was photography, climbing was dominant in my life, and I was really involved in that community and scene and whatever label you want to put on it. And having photography now as the primary thing in my life, and obviously something that's now become a job, it's very difficult for me to say where I would be without it. But I do think that if it wasn't there would be something else that had replaced it. Possibly climbing, possibly some kind of activity. But my life definitely feels a lot more complete.
Yeah, sure.
I'm a kind of person who has to work and do something that I love doing. If I don't love doing that, I'm going to struggle.
Yeah,
That's something I've learned from photography.
What do you mean?
I always thought that sort of you'd be happy if you had a sort of a nice job that paid you a nice salary and you etc. But I have to be. I've learned in the last 10, 15, maybe 10 years, 15 years or so, is that I'm the type of person who has to love what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. Otherwise, I'll just get bored and frustrated.
Yeah.
So that is something I've really taken from photography. And so, going back to your question on where would I be without it?
Yeah.
I don't know. Probably in a
lost,
a little bit lost, a little bit confused. Maybe there'll be something else I found. I mean, there are other things in life I enjoy.
Of course.
But this is the way I've chosen to do it and put myself across.
Yeah.
And, make my career. Excuse me, even from starting at a slightly older age.
Yeah.
But still being able to focus on other things.
You've got 50 years.
50 years at least.
To build this. We're going to be taking pictures too, we're
the
90s, 100s.
medical advances we'll be doing.
But we never
150.
know. Yeah. Never know what's around the corner, do we?
Nope.
Who do you think I should have on the podcast? Have you got 3 names for me? People you recommend that I should get on? You can't say Mark because Mark's already coming on.
Oh yeah, Mark is coming on, isn't he? Who do I think that you should have on the podcast? Okay.
Go on.
Okay. Some people I know.
Yeah.
Some of them you may know yourself. So I've recently started advertising workshops with a black and white photographer called Murray Livingston.
Right.
He's also South African.
Right.
He's far more introspective than I am.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
It's perfect for your podcast. I think he would be. I think he'd be great, and I think he would give your viewers a very different perspective than what we've had here today.
Yeah.
So secondly, I'd recommend my friend Matthias Conrad. He's a German photographer from central Germany.
Yeah.
He's a lot of black and white images of botanicals, of flowers, very simple images, but absolutely exquisitely done. He's also the master of the cat meme, and we seem to communicate almost entirely in cat memes. But he's very interesting. He does a lot of sort of black and white photography, a lot of minimalist images, very fine art.
Yeah, okay. Give me a lot to talk about then.
Very fine art. Give you something completely different.
Introspective character again, would you say?
No, not necessarily.
Okay.
I'm sure he is in his own way, but the way we communicate is...
So you give me a nice mixture of people here, with Murray being introspective. And
I'm trying to think of someone else who would... I don't know this person. I only know her through work on social media, but there's a photographer up in Scotland called Margaret Soraya.
Oh yeah, I've seen. I think I follow her work. Yeah,
and I think you would enjoy her work. And I've heard her in podcasts before. I think I've heard her in Matt Payne's podcast. Probably going back a few years ago. And really enjoyed what she had to say.
Yeah,
I think there's quite a lot of sort of introspection and experience. And she does a lot of wild swimming,
right,
etc. Based up in northern Scotland somewhere, if my mind serves me correctly. Yeah. I'll send you some links to all these people afterwards, and then
greatly appreciate it.
Your show notes. So
thank you, Eugene. It's been a pleasure. Thanks, you,
Brad. Thanks for chatting and listening to my mumbling and musings, and I hope it all makes sense.
Absolutely. It's some really interesting thoughts, and I'm looking forward to seeing some of these upcoming projects.
Yes, well, I hope to release them sometime soon. We'll see.
Yeah. Where can people find you?
People can find me on Instagram,
at
Facebook.
Eugene Theron.
Yeah, hang on a second. Instagram, Facebook, Threads at Eugene Theron Photography.
Yeah.
You can find me via my website at www.eugenetheron.com.
Yeah.
And I'm going to stop snapping these sticks. They stop making a noise. And there was something else. I can't remember.
YouTube? Not yet.
No, not yet. Maybe.
We'll say nothing about that. Not
I'm
yet.
not going to talk about it yet. No. That's a secret.
I'll put some links in the show.
Yeah, please do. So Facebook, Instagram, Threads, Vero, website.
Awesome.
Please go to the website. That's the most important.
And you've got a few articles on there, right?
Not currently. I've just redone the website. So I was going to transfer some from articles over from my old website, but I'm in the process of writing some new ones.
Yeah.
So which I'm quite excited about.
Oh, great.
Hopefully you'll get to see those.
Lots upcoming then.
Lots of stuff upcoming.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Finding Light with me, Brad Carr, interviewing Eugene Theron in the Shropshire Hills. I hope you found it insightful, inspiring, and encouraging in many ways. Eugene talked quite openly and vulnerably in parts of that discussion, which I found to be honest and inspiring, and it's going to help me grow, and I hope it helps you grow too. If you like the podcast, then please consider leaving me a review to help me grow and spread my love of photography, creativity, nature, and all the good stuff that comes along with that. If you really love the podcast, consider supporting me as an artist and helping me grow. I'd love to invest in some better equipment so that we don't have that nasty wind again. I'd love to get some on clothing mics. So that's my next investment. So, I have a range of prints available on my website. And I'd be most grateful if anybody felt the need to support me with a purchase of one of my limited edition prints. Until next time, I will say goodbye, and I hope you join me again as I invite my next guest on. This guest is another exciting one. We share lots in common and both find a similar love of woodland in recent years. So next week, I'll be interviewing a photographer called Mark Robbins, and I know Mark is excited to come on and talk to me as well. So it's going to lead to some pretty interesting, open and honest discussions, and I look forward to bringing you that episode next week. Bye for now.